In this session, we're going to continue with species diversity, but we're going to talk about the ecosystem consequences of altered species diversity. We're going to start by explaining that there are some particular species that have strong effects on ecosystem processes by directly mediating energy and material fluxes or by altering abiotic conditions that regulate the rates of these processes. To understand this concept, we're going to have an example about how a species, the introduction of a single species, can have a great impact on an ecosystem. This is an example of Gamba Grass that has transformed ecosystems in Australia. It arrived from Africa and it became adapted very quickly. And this type of grass started displacing native species. It grows very tall, up to 4 meters, and it also kills the savanna eucalyptus. But the biggest problem is that it burns very quickly, and the intensity is 8 times higher than with the native grasses. So this is just an example of how a single species can alter an ecosystem. But there are some other examples where the introduction of a species can alter, for instance, also nutrient flows, such as nitrogen, when there are plants that fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. So they put in more input of nitrogen, and these have an alteration. So the way that these species have alterations on the ecosystem have been classified. And we're going to start by explaining that some of them can have a positive effect and some can have a negative effect. Positive can be to increase agricultural or forestry production, but there are some negative effects, such as we can have species that are not that harvestable, and also the loss of species with important cultural value or aesthetic value, right? The introduction of species can also alter changes in the biotic controls. Biotic controls are, for instance, microbial communities that perform the composition of certain organics, etc., that are altered due to the introduction of a new species. We can also have changes in abiotic controls due to the introduction of species. For instance, we can have these changes in biotic controls, such as the availability of limiting resources. That is, for example, the reduction in river flow due to the invasion of deep-rooted desert trees. And imagine how this alteration of the flow can affect the species that depend on that river. We can also have alteration on disturbance regime, and this can also is directly connected to the example of the river, right? Too. But we can also have disturbance on micro or macro climate variables due to, for instance, increased fire frequency resulting from the grass invasion, from the example that we discussed just before. Or we can have insulation of soils by mosses in Arctic tundra, for instance, that contribute to conditions that allow for permafrost. Altered processes can also influence the availability of ecosystem goods and services directly or indirectly by further altering biodiversity. This can result in loss of useful species or increases in noxious species. So what we were talking about, richness and evenness, is this variation of the distribution or the concentration of these species, right?